Hello and welcome to Unit 7 of the main course Remote Update of Programs and Functionalities. In this unit we will talk about in-place updates of hardware and PLC programs, and we'll showcase this with two different types of PLCs. So what is the content? We will talk about the download, then the online change, and finally we're going to apply updates on PLCs that are actually running. So what are the learning outcomes? You should be able to understand the differences between download and online change on different PLCs. You should be able to prepare to update, and then you should be able to connect and use download or online change to finally do the update of the user program. The question is, which type should we use when? When should we use download and when should we use online changes? So what is the most common case with PLCs? For most of the updates, it's just a minor change of the user program. So only the user program is touched, and this allows us to do this update remotely because you don't need physical access to the system, because you do not change hardware in any way. Nevertheless, the connection relies on a working PLC, of course, so that you can connect, and TCP/IP, so some internet protocol, should be active on the machine to be able to connect remotely. And this will help to do the operations without on-site interaction with the hardware. Of course, it is quite a good idea to have some person near the machine, because if you update something, it's quite likely that something will happen with the machine, and this person will then be able to give you feedback. But nevertheless, in many circumstances also a camera will help you to monitor the system where you update the software. Sometimes, nevertheless, also firmware or operating system updates are necessary, especially when you updated the development environment. In this case, you can also conduct remote updates, which is more an upgrade then. But you have to be aware that it could happen that the machine doesn't start automatically, properly. Therefore, there could be the necessity to have some interaction by a human that is right next to the machine. So what is a download? Like mentioned in Unit 6, a download is a full replacement of the user program. So the whole program that is already existing on the PLC is discarded, removed, deleted, and it is replaced in full by your new program, which means that there's a lot of components that could be uploaded again. Nevertheless, it's a full exchange. So the old project is gone. The running project, of course, before it is deleted, will be stopped, like on a cold start. So total shutdown, not electrically, but in terms of software. And when you start again, all initializations are executed, which means if you have some init sequences, all this will be run through. Therefore, all variables, all parameters, all interfaces are initialized properly. If you have some persistent variables, retained variables, normally they are retained, so they are kept in the PLC as long as you just do a download. If you change operating system, if you change more than this or do a factory reset, then of course also the retained variables are gone, which means that some parameters could be lost. So you have to be aware that if you create a program, you should be able to provide mechanisms where you can reinitialize those values. For example, the zero setting of some motors or similar things that are stored in retained variables, so persistent variables on the PLC. But if you delete them, the machine may not be able to start because some parameters are missing. On contrary, there's the online change. Online change means that only the blocks that have changed in the program are replaced by the newer versions. This is very useful if it is just programming sequences like algorithms, or you change the sequence of activation of certain mechanisms or similar things, or which is quite likely, you change some timings, wait a little bit longer or a little bit shorter to improve the process or the process stability. To do this, the running program doesn't have to be stopped. Of course, you could do a full download always, but if you want to do an online change, the running program is not stopped, which means that with the next cycle, the newer version will be executed, starting with the new cycle. But no initializations are executed if you do not trigger them manually. So you should be aware that you cannot rely on variables being initialized properly if you just introduce them. And be aware that if you're using pointers, something that I would not personally would not suggest, pointer variables retain their value from the last cycle. And if they point to other variables and their size could have changed, then the result of the pointer's functionality could be totally wrong, leading to a malfunction of the machine. And this is pretty dangerous. And that's why most PLC manufacturers give warnings that damage to properties and persons due to unexpected behavior could happen, that there is no restart, therefore something could be damaged, the workpiece, or even people could be harmed, and you have to make sure that your new program code really results in the desired behavior of the control system. It's always nice if you have the same machine twice, so you can apply those updates on your local machine, test it, and when it's working properly, then go to the machine that is located at the customer or at the production site. But most of the times you won't have that chance. So you have to be aware that you know what you're going to do or what you're doing to prevent the machine or people to get harmed. So how does this in-place updates now look on different PLCs? So it's the same idea, but on different systems. Let's start with Beckhoff. And Beckhoff, the idea of Beckhoff PLCs is that you have a Windows operating system, and this gets hardened components, real-time components that run within Windows, but without needing Windows at all. Which means that even if Windows crashes, the real-time PLC process does not crash. The advantage is that you can use a Windows machine, even your PC, to run a Beckhoff PLC, and therefore the Beckhoff PLC controllers, the CPUs, are Intel machines normally that can be used for any type of computing task that you would do on other PCs as well. So basically they're a PC that can be mounted on rails, including a real-time kernel for the PLC part. And this means that you can just change the whole system without rebooting the machine, because the PLC part is some kind of program running on the CPU. And therefore you don't have to shut down the Windows and shut down everything, but just change the PLC part. And that's what we're going to see now in a short live demo. Later on we will check how it looks like when you do some slight changes and how to find out about the details change dialog. In the first example, the program is already installed on the PLC and is already running. So there's no changes, we just want to log onto the PLC. You can see that the green LEDs are lighting, therefore the PLC is working like expected. Now we're going to log in into the system by just clicking the login button, and you can see that it logs in automatically without asking any questions. In the second example, we do a slight change. In this case, we are going to change the timer value from 2000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds, to just 1 second. When we log in again, we see that the application has changed since last download, obviously. So a system asks us what we are going to do now. Do we want to log in with an online change? Do we do some download, so the full download, or do we log in without any change? Which means that we just log into the PLC with the old version of the program, so the program that we see on our screen is not the program that is in the PLC. If you click online change, it will change online, of course. If you are interested in the details, just click the details window, and this will show you the changes that have to be applied for the new program. So the declaration has changed and there's some variable change as well. So far the changes only have been minor, which means that an online change was possible. If we do some severe change, like adding a task or changing task classes, we will have to do a download. We'll be forced to do the download. So if we add another task to the project and then log in into the system, the system doesn't give you the option to select what to do, but it asks whether you just want to download the latest code change to the PLC. In our next example, we're going to look at the CPU from Bernecker and Reiner. Bernecker and Reiner CPUs are different in a way that the operating system as well as the firmware is individual. It's a third-party component that has to be installed on the CPU first to run the PLC part, which means that everything has to be done from within Automation Studio, the firmware, the operating system, and your user code. Nevertheless, the idea of having downloads or online changes is quite similar, and we are going to look at it right now. In B&R Automation Studio, there's two different options. You either can log in to the system and then monitor it immediately, which means that all the variables and parameters on the system can be monitored without dealing with the user program, or you can upload the new program to the PLC. If you do that, there's always a dialog popping up after compiling it. So if you want to upload something, transfer to the target, it checks the whole project, and if there's no changes, it anyway shows the dialog, but there it tells you that there are no difference to transfer. Therefore, it's only a close button that you can click. If we now change something in the program, the same dialog appears. Now there's some differences, as we will see. So what I'm going to change is the timer value from 3 seconds to 2 seconds, and then click upload again. As you can see, the program is recompiled and it checks for the differences and says, okay, there's differences between the project and the target detected, and you can check what is going to change. So the program is changing, and there's some stuff that can be ignored in this project. Nevertheless, it can be installed on the current online target, and if we do that, it's just doing a transfer and we're finished. So there was no need for some kind of reboot. So far we've been able to do an online change, but if we change something under the hood, we have to do a full download, which is quite obvious because something has changed where the system cannot recover. In this case, we're going to change the IP address of the system. We move to the physical view, change the configuration, and change the IP address. And when we now go to transfer, the system is compiled again, so it's analyzing the project, it's generating the header files, it checks for configurations of the hardware and so on and so on. And then it tells that there's differences between project and target detected, like expected, but it's not only the user program, it's also something under the hood. Therefore, a reboot is required, which means if we now click on transfer, the project is transferred, but also the changes are applied under the hood, which means that the system will have to do a reboot, as you can see with the LEDs. Now it's red, the one on top, and this means that the PLC is doing a reboot, and when it has rebooted, the IP address has changed. By the way, B&R always suggests that you do a consistent installation, which means that you do a full download instead of some online change, just to make sure that you know what you're going to do. And as mentioned before, there will be a red exclamation mark if a reboot is necessary, which will give you an indication that the reboot will take longer and the machine has to be restarted from scratch. So the downtime is significant, or at least experienceable, compared to an online change. And it could happen that there's differences, although there's no differences to transfer. As seen before, there's differences mentioned, but there's no differences to transfer. And this can happen if some older modules still exist on the PLC that are not necessary for the current project. Nevertheless, you can clean them up or you can ignore them. It doesn't have any functionality change. Like you've seen before in the example, there's some libraries or modules on the PLC that are not used anymore. For Siemens, it's quite similar. And the Siemens PLCs somehow are encapsulated. Siemens doesn't talk about the type of CPU they use, so that the processor type that they use, and the PLCs are only accessible through the TIA Portal software produced and developed by Siemens. So if you want to upload a new firmware on the device, you have to use TIA Portal. You can download the firmware from the internet, and you can use TIA Portal also to update all these central peripherals. And normally, after firmware update, again, a reboot is mandatory. So the mechanism is similar, and you can achieve a full download with the download and reset PLC program, whereas a normal download, so an online change, can be achieved with the menu item above. And again, there is a load preview to see the objects that are included in the download procedure. Finally, there's some tips and tricks that could help you preventing reboots. So if you change data blocks, normally a reboot is necessary. But you can circumvent this. There's a trick to add more variables in advance. So if you know that you're going to extend your system in the future, you could introduce variables that are not used in the current program, but that are reserved as some kind of spare for the future. Also, it is a good idea to oversize the memory card, so there's plenty of room for updates on the memory card, so you don't run into a memory error. And if you have to, for some reason, change only during operation, so download, a full download and a reset is not allowed for any reason. There's a trick to introduce a new data block, put all the variables there, copy the variables in the running PLC to the new data block, and then in a second step, change the program to point to the new data block. Through this mechanism, a full download can be circumvented, which could be helpful in some situations if you're experienced pro on Siemens and other PLCs and have to make sure that the machine is running continuously without stopping. And in the next unit, we're going to talk about doing the updates and upgrades over an internet connection. So we're looking at routers and switches that are used to connect the PLCs to the rest of the world.